Welcome to Eternity Archives, a podcast by Eternity College for students, alumni, faculty, and friends. I'm Ernesto Duke, Eternity's president and the host of this podcast. At Eternity, we have students, alumni, and faculty living all around the world, living for the kingdom of Jesus. One of the most beautiful things about Eternity is how our diverse community, representing different countries, cultures, and backgrounds, comes together to study and be transformed by the scriptures. In this podcast, we hope to share the amazing story of Jesus' people in God's kingdom around the world at Eternity College. This is Eternity Archives. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching Eternity Archives. We're back here for another episode with Matt Buell. So, Matt, thank you for being on the show. And I would love to hear from you just a little bit. Just tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're living, your family, ministry, anything you want about you. And happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here. My name is Matt Buell. I live in Indiana, in Terre Haute, Indiana, specifically. I'm 35. I have 5 children, ages 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. And then I've been married for 13 years this month. And I've lived here my whole life. I live in a tiny little, I live in Terre Haute, Indiana, but it's like a tiny little rural community right next to it in the same county. I've lived there forever. I've lived in the same house basically my whole life. And I've been doing, I started following Jesus when I was 15, probably. 2000, probably summer 2005. 15, 16. And I went to church camp, gave my life to Christ, went to the church that I work at now. I started going there to the youth group, and I've been attending this church ever since. I got married in this church. And then in my early 20s, I did heating and cooling as a trade for 9 or 10 years. And then at the beginning of 2022, my lead pastor brought me on as the children's ministry director. So I do that. I do that full time, but I'm also the janitor at my church. They were able to match my salary if I did both. So
All right, perfect.
so I get, technically I'm bivocational, I guess, but I'm
Yeah.
in the same building all week long. So
And anytime the HVAC breaks down, they don't even call anybody. It's
no,
just,
yeah. No, I
That's
make them call somebody.
yeah. Awesome. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. I actually didn't know that about you. I think like it's kind of a rarity now to find someone who grew like basically you just haven't left, right? You've been in the same
Mhm.
community the whole time. And as like
Yeah.
a church leader, pastor, whatever, like that's kind of your dream, right? You're raising people up, you're discipling them, and then it sucks
Mhm.
when they when they leave. You're like, man,
Mhm.
that's a lot of
Yeah.
like investment. I mean, I guess it's cool. Obviously, there's different sides of that in the biblical story of raising up
Yeah.
leaders and sending them out as church planners, missionaries, things like that. But then it's also you see Jesus telling people to stay where they're at too.
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah, that's pretty cool. I didn't know. I guess I knew you were in a small town, but I didn't realize it was like the same small town
Oh,
from day one.
it's exactly
Are
the
you
same. Yeah. Yeah.
did
Yeah.
you like take over your parents' house too? Like you're literally in the same house?
So my grandparents bought the house in the 70s. It was built in the 1870s. She
Wow.
bought it in the 1970s. And then her and my grandpa did. And then he died in 89, the year I was born. And then she lived there with my grandfather that raised me. So they lived there while I was living with my parents. And then my parents got separated. They
Hmm.
separated when I was in kindergarten, probably. And then lived with my mom in the house. So my grandma moved over to another piece of property that my great
Hmm.
grandfather had owned. She still lives there to this day. And then, I lived in that house with my mom, and then my mom's weird, and I don't know how else to say it. She's weird, and
Yeah.
she left.
Okay.
She's not like a drug addict or anything.
Okay.
She wasn't like abusive. She's just, I don't know. She has an element to her that's kind of insane, and she left,
Okay.
moved to Arizona, and I didn't. I was like, I'm not doing that. I was 10, and I was like,
Okay.
no, I'm staying. So so then I just like slept in my grandma's basement until they like built a house and then built me a room in a nicer basement, and I lived there until I got married, and then I moved back into this house
Jeez.
after we got married. Yeah.
Have you
So,
considered running for mayor in your little town?
oh, of the city? No, no, that's all
No.
right. I've
Let's
got
say,
let's see, my grandma. What was it? Township trustee. That was my grandma was the township trustee. My uncle was the township trustee. Maybe
uh,
I'll do that sometime.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Hold, keep the legacy strong.
yeah, yeah.
I'd love to hear from you a little bit about why you decided to go to Bible college. I mean, I know that you started working at the church. I don't know if those kind of
Mm.
coincide with one another. And then in that same question, what for you has been kind of what you expected? Like, this is what I thought Bible school or Bible college was going to be. And then what's been different about it? And maybe even, I don't know if you had experience with online school before, but maybe a similar question of what's been what you thought it was going to be and then what's been different.
So yeah, so I've always, I wouldn't say I've always enjoyed learning, but I have, or reading or anything, but I got really into podcasts and audiobooks when I was doing HVAC and I was alone for 8 hours a day in crawl spaces and I needed something to occupy my mind. So I got into, yeah, just a bunch of different, like, just normal preaching, just churches that uploaded their sermons kind of thing. And then I got into more like scholarship, I guess, focused podcasts like Preston Sprinkle's Theology in the Raw was like a big one for me that I got into in like 2014, 2015, maybe. I think he was doing it back then. Anyways, and so after just listening to that for years, getting a library card and getting free audiobooks and learning, getting into NT Wright books and into um just yeah, listening to all of like C.S. Lewis's stuff, listening to um yeah, those are probably the two big ones. N.T. Wright and C.S. Lewis are probably what got me like into theology, I guess. And so I really enjoyed it, and I was like, oh, I can just do this for fun when I'm working. But I did always feel I I worked at a family and children's ministry in like a pretty impoverished community that's very close to mine from age 19 to
Mm,
22. That's where I met my wife. And so being there, like I felt like it was a good place and there was kind of a falling out. It's a small community, so there's not a ton of support as far as to pay you to do something like that at a nonprofit. So once I had a wife and had a baby on the way, I had to find a real job. So I started doing HVAC. I just kind of did that, and then felt the call. Like basically, my lead pastor was like, if you ever feel called into full time ministry, please tell me before you go somewhere else or apply for jobs or school out of town, kind of thing.
mm,
And so me and him had a lot of conversations over about a half a decade, like 6 years of just long conversations about what it would actually look like to serve in a local church and be accountable to elders and to
mm.
a leadership team and to a congregation. And I was not ready to do that when I was 25.
What
Um,
what about it
but
was what about you was not ready? Was it like you were intimidated by it, or it's just like too much structure, too much like
uh,
hierarchy, or
uh,
what?
Yeah, probably too much accountability to not do what I wanted to do.
Ah,
I like it just took me, I guess it took me like having children and seeing like what it actually takes to like run a household and actually like to actually take care of people that weren't me.
mm,
And there's just some selfishness that had to be broken, I guess. Like
yeah.
um and I've always been pretty I wouldn't say I'm like anti-authority, but I am anti-arbitrary authority, I
Mm,
guess, naturally. And so it's hard for me to like, it's hard to me for me to submit to somebody that I don't think loves me personally.
yeah, there you go.
It's that's hard. And so, um, yeah, so that was what was hard about it. But then like once we got closer and closer to it and prayed a lot more, like I was like, okay, like I'm ready. Like I know all the elders in my church. I've known them since I was 15. Like I know that they love me. I know that they want what's best for me. So I was willing to like put some stuff aside
Mm,
and just do what they needed done and what the ministry needed done. And so then one of my our lead pastor, like one of his stipulations was he's like I don't care if you go to Bible college. He's like if you move up in the pastorate, you're probably going to want to because you want the tools to know how to study and how to teach and how to preach and how to do all those things. he's like, but more than anything, he's like, I want you to pursue like more training and more education in whatever you do. He's like, so
Yeah.
if it's even, he's like, even if it's just like 2 conferences a year about children's ministry, go do that. Like go
Mm.
like whatever your passion is, like make sure that you're growing in that. And so I really saw school, and I have time now. Like I'm actually home now. I'm not working 70 hours a week anymore, so it's just easier to have a little bit extra time for school. So I started, yeah. So Bible college really was just desiring to, I guess, to learn how to study again and how to study
Mm.
something that I'm actually passionate about and actually care about. I was a
Mm.
C student in high school. I didn't like particularly apply myself. And I went to online college in 2008 for 6 weeks and I just stopped logging in.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
failed. I failed every class.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just, yeah, I didn't really do any school or whatever. And then I did two writing classes through Moody Bible Institute before I
Oh,
came to
okay.
Eternity, because the pastor that raised me, he like that's where he went to school for his undergrad, and I'd visited there a few times when I was younger and liked it, and so I was like, all right, like I'll go online, but it's just very very expensive.
Yeah.
It's as expensive as any other school, $1,500 per class is just really hard to pay
Yeah.
myself. And so I liked it. The same lady taught both of my classes, and I really liked her. She was a really good. She just taught college writing and research writing. That's what
Mm.
her kind of job was, and very, very, very sweet lady. Her name's Tammy. I don't know. I can't remember her last name, but yeah,
Yeah.
she was great. But yeah, so I did, and while I was doing my research writing class, I heard you on Preston Sprinkles podcast talking about
Mm.
eternity, and I listened to it and I was like, man, I really like how that guy talks about school. And I really like how he talks
Mm.
about college. And I like how he talks about debt and money and the
Mm.
scam that is higher learning in a lot
Yeah.
of respects. And so I was like, I'm going to get on their website and check it out. And obviously the price was right. Like,
Yeah.
what I think you guys, like last summer, I think you guys upped it to 380 a credit or something. And so when I
Two
signed
set
up at
270. 275. Yeah.
270, was it 250 before?
Yeah, I went from 250 to 275.
Okay. So the
It goes
first
up
one I did
like,
was 250.
yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah.
250.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So the first one I did was 250. So I was like, yeah, dude, I can do whatever 750 or whatever that is. I was like, I can do that. Like I can take, this tax check I have and I can set aside this much and I can pay for a class, or I can, I can get a side, I can do whatever side jobs I need to do to, get the money paid at once and do a class, right?
Yeah.
And so I did that, and yeah, the first class I took was self-paced, and I loved it. And while I was taking that self-paced class, I had a guy from my church approach me and was talking to me about school, and um, yeah, he offered to basically cover tuition for me in perpetuity till I'm done with my bachelor's.
Hmm.
And so I was only planning on taking one class as I had the money,
Uh-huh.
and now I'm taking one class no matter what, like
Yeah.
whatever chunk of time we're in. I'm going to do one, at least one, and then try to knock this thing out. Hopefully, I'll get my bachelor's by the time I'm 40. That's kind of
Yeah. There
my
you go.
hope, but we'll see.
There's a current student, well, I guess you could still call him that, Abenaya, who started in 2004. And
Whoa.
he's a pastor, 3 kids, I believe. But you might beat him at one class every once in a while. You might beat him. I mean, I don't know when he's gonna finish, but Abe, if you're listening, you can tell me.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that. You know, the last episode we had on a guy, Rafa, who's in the Dominican Republic, and like he's taking, I don't know, probably closer to like 9 to 12 credits per semester. And then we've got people like you. And I think that it's great. You know, the school developed that policy because we felt like it was just a dirty thing that other schools did to like force people to take more classes at a time, and that's really just forcing people into more loans. But it's turned into less of just trying to avoid a dirty practice and more like it lets you decide like what's good for you and in that moment and for your stage of life. And I imagine when your 15 kids get a little bit older, you might have a little bit more free time, if they're all in
Yeah.
school, they're doing sports or whatever it might be. So that's cool, man. I'd love to hear a little bit from you. Like, I know you've talked about children's ministry. I know we've had some offline conversations about missions and stuff like that. But what is something that you would say that you are uniquely passionate about or care about? What's something that you feel like God's put on your heart that maybe to some degree you like can't understand why everybody else doesn't care as much about this thing, but like you're just really, really, you're really into it or really passionate about it?
Yeah, I mean the answer is children. I mean, I just so like I felt like when I was a kid, I like yeah, I mean really for my entire life, like I just felt like when I was a kid that just like there were no adults that would like it just felt like no one would ever like look me in the eye and pay attention to like what I actually needed them to listen to or what I needed them to like do for me. It was just like this constant just getting like batted around from one thing to another and from one adult to another that wouldn't like give me an answer.
Hmm.
I guess.
Was do you feel like when you were a kid, was there like a specific question you were asking that, or was it just like to give you the time of day to let your questions be heard or whatever?
I think it was like time and space,
Hmm.
like time to like actually and like give me something real. Like give me something real that I can actually like hold on to and actually do something with, right? Because I remember because there were like glimpses of that. Like my second grade teacher, so my second grade teacher was my fourth grade teacher as well.
Hmm.
Because when I left, when we got out of second grade, she moved up to fourth grade, and then I just, got her again as my teacher. And I probably think about that lady every day. Like, I
Really?
don't know that there's like, yeah, like, I like, I mean, I also drive by her house probably, twice a week just because again, I live in the
Yeah,
same
because you live
place
in
I
a
always
small.
have.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. But it's just like, I just think like she really was like this person
Hmm.
that just um, like I don't know, like I just remember reading, like her sitting and reading to us, and just the time that she spent.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know, like and even as I went into high school, like I had a couple more teachers, like I had a couple more English teachers, and one history teacher that I thought really paid attention and really cared.
Hmm.
Um, and then I was also like very very involved in like in hardcore and like punk rock music when I was young. I mean I'm involved now in that I go to shows, but I'm not involved in any like subculture I guess right now. But like you know seeing my friends and seeing what they needed and how everybody was just like constantly asking this question of like what is the point of living and what is the like I
Hmm.
don't know. It really like yeah, it still sits with me and I still think about it. And so like when it comes to children, like I um yeah, I've always cared about them. Like I've always enjoyed, when I was 19, I kind of fell into the ministry I was doing. Like we played a show at this ministry with Flatfoot 56. You know who that band is?
No, I
They were
don't.
kind of big. They were like a big they were like a Christian version of like Flogging Molly or Dropkick Murphys
Hmm.
kind of. They were like that kind of like uh folk punk or like Celtic punk kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so like a buddy of mine had booked them and we played a show and that's how I ended up getting to know him and then getting to they're from Chicago and so they came down and played and I met this guy and I was like, hey, this is awesome. There were kids skateboarding and hanging out and he was like, hey, you want to come work? And I was like, yeah, sure. So basically I worked a camp for them and then
Hmm.
so I kind of fell into like children's ministry and like youth ministry or whatever. And then as I got older and I had my own kids, I was like, man, like the children at our church need somebody to pay attention and
Hmm.
somebody to advocate for like what's best for them, right? And that's just something that I don't know. I've just always cared about it. I think because I was miserable
Hmm.
as a kid, and I don't want my children to be miserable, and I don't want my friends' children to be miserable at
Right.
church, and I don't want them to. Um, yeah, I care about them, man. Like I have a lot of friends that um, I have multiple friends that have OD'd. Like I've got friends that have, taken their own lives, and they just it was hard. Like I know their life was hard when they were a kid. Like, and
Hmm.
I just don't want to be an adult that's hard to be around for a kid, and I don't want to have a place that's hard for them to be here.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't know, that's kind of like the drive
Yeah.
for a lot of it. And then probably like 10, around the time my son started school, so he's in sixth grade. So it was probably like, yeah, 6 years, 7 years ago. My wife read a book called For the Children's Sake.
Mm.
That was written by Susan Schaefer Macaulay. She was Francis Schaeffer's daughter.
Hmm.
Um, and she wrote that book based on these principles that there's a English like school teacher trainer lady named Charlotte Mason in like the early 1900s. And she wrote these like 6 volumes about children and
Mm.
how to educate them,
Mm.
I guess. And it's used in a lot of like homeschool applications now, but there's also like classical schools that use it, and things like that. And so after like getting like finding out about her and reading her materials and like stuff that she was saying over 100 years ago, and then I could hear it and still be like, wow, this is what the kids really need. Like she writes a lot
Mm.
about how like to shape what a child like give children a smorgasbord of good and beautiful things, um, cornucopia of good and beautiful things, and they'll take and all of it's good. So let them take whatever they want from the table
Mm.
because it's all going to be good, and that will form their desires, and what forms their desires will steer their will and what they choose to do.
Mm.
And she was a Christian, and she was I think she was Anglican because she was from England, but she was just a very like yeah, man, the stuff she wrote just really like, yeah, it started to give me the language with like how to
Mm.
talk about children in a way that I've kind of always felt about them, but
Mm.
had never really been able to like vocalize, I guess. So, um, yeah, so the idea is just to like, yeah, just to make my church like as welcoming for the children as it can be. And our church, I wasn't here for it, but the Gen Xers that grew up at this church in the '90s they're not here anymore.
Mm.
They didn't stay. A lot of them are still in town, but they're not in the faith.
Yeah.
And there was just, I think it was a hard place to be a kid. And by the time I was coming, the pastor that kind of raised me in the faith, he was a very different guy than the guy they had in the '90s, and he
Yeah.
really shifted the culture. Um, like the first thing he did when his first Sunday, he tore down the no skateboarding sign. That was
Mm.
like a big like moment.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So,
What, so what, maybe some, what are some practical ways that, um, that either individuals or maybe churches and ministry leaders can be, I really like, it resonated what you said that like, I want to be an adult that it's not hard for kids to be around. I feel like coaching youth sports and stuff like that, which is my main involvement, like with youth ministry or whatever. Um, it's just so true. Like you could have really great coaches that are really knowledgeable about the sport or even about like player development or skill development. But if they're not an enjoyable person for kids to be around, or even like I don't want to be around them either, like then they're not going to be a good coach, and you know, with a lot of youth sports, um, one bad season will ruin that sport for the kid. Like they could have one bad baseball season and then they'll never play baseball again. And not that like playing baseball is the most important thing in the world, but how much more true can that be of a youth group or a children's ministry or something like that? That like mom dragging me here for that month that she dragged me here is just in those interactions in that classroom where I wasn't allowed to say this thing or I said something, I have a very vivid memory of saying I don't know what you call it, a Christian curse word, a curse word I was allowed to say at home. But it wasn't a curse word. It was
oh, like
wussy.
crap or something.
No, it was
Oh,
wussy.
nice, sick.
WSSY. Yeah, I was pretty hardcore, dude. But I said it in a youth group. We're not in a youth group, like a children's classroom. And
Yeah.
I got kicked out of class. And I
Yeah.
was sent, like, I was supposed to leave that class, go find my parents in the sanctuary, tell them that I got kicked out. And instead of doing that, I just walked out of the building and went like to the lawn outside. And then my dad was pissed because he wasn't like a big church guy, and he's like, "What
Uh,
the hell? Why did you kicked my son out of class and you didn't walk
yeah.
him to me? Like he's 9 years
Yeah.
old. What are you doing?"
Right. Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
was like yeah, from that moment until probably like high school ish. Maybe no, that's not true. Junior high. I didn't do any children's ministry. I would just sit in the sanctuary with my
Yeah.
parents. But it's like
Yeah.
that one thing. So I guess that's an extreme example, but maybe what are some more practical ways that you feel like churches and ministries are just not as inviting to kids or into youth in general to be part of the family of Jesus that's supposed to be celebrating like this unified thing that we're a part of every week.
I think, I think a big thing for us is we try to, everything we do, we try not to make it tedious.
Mm.
And anything we do that's big, we try to take all of the pageantry out of it and try to make it like, not try to make them, I don't like church isn't school and it's not school and it's not, I don't even know what. It's not like a recital. Like it's not this thing
Mm.
that needs to be perfect.
Yeah.
Obviously. And a lot of kids grow up thinking that like everything has to go just right and be perfect. And that's not the story of scripture. And that's not like
Right.
that's
It's
just
not
not who
how any
Jesus
of
is.
life
Like,
works.
yeah. And so it's just like
Mm.
that's an aspect of it. So like, and there's probably little things that I don't have a lot of like hills that I die on as far as that stuff goes. Um, but I think like as far as what people do, like if you like worksheets, that's fine. I don't care if you like using videos, that's fine. That's great. I don't care. Like, I don't know. I have preferences, but I don't have a lot of like, things like that. But
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is like, is the atmosphere. Like when children in general, like whether it's you're in children's church or they're upstairs with you because of your tradition or whatever, or you're all together, or even if you're just a greeter, like that you also learn their names and you smile at them and you look them in the eyes, and you the same way you learn things about their parents, you learn things about them, and you follow up with them in your conversations. Like,
Mm.
one of the biggest things is like children are born people, children are born persons. Like, they are a
Mm.
whole person just like I am. They have all of the same, they have the same, like, spiritual, emotional, physical needs that I do, but they also have like really the same capacities that I do
Mm.
spiritually. And I think that we need to, like, we don't need to, I don't think we need to baby them either. Like,
Mm.
I think that they can hear the stories from scripture without us having to add a bunch of doctrine or theology to them. Like,
Mm.
I think they can hear a story in the Old Testament and they can just hear the story, and that's it. I don't need to preach at them.
Yeah.
That's a big thing too. Like, they don't need to be preached. Like, I don't need to preach at other people's children. That's their dad's job. Like, I'm not like, I'll preach at my own kids when
Yeah, sure,
when they
sure.
need it or whatever. But it's like, that's not what you're doing when they're with you. And then I also think like including them. Like, we recently at my church, like, everybody knows getting volunteers is hard for nursery and for children's church and things like that. And for a long time, we took fifth Sundays and we didn't have children's church. We would still do. I got a church. Our church is about 400 people if you
Mm.
count kids. If you count kids, which I do, obviously, there's 400 people.
Yeah.
And so we would close down the children's church and have everybody in the sanctuary singing, but we would still do nursery. Well, this season, I also closed the nursery on fifth Sundays.
Mm.
So it's just, the whole children's wing is shut down on fifth Sundays, and we all go to the sanctuary and we just do. The kids hear the sermon, they hear, we do it all together, and then the next week we'll be back in children's church,
Yeah.
and I
There's
like
babies
it.
crying
And
and kids running around
right,
and yeah.
it was pretty wild. My pastor had to preach that one, and he's like, that wasn't the easiest sermon I've ever had to give.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
but
and
yeah,
I know we're running late on time, but I just think it's fascinating because it is weird how compartmentalized like Sunday mornings can be. Even within a church, right? You could
Mhm.
sometimes, depending on the size of the church, you might have K through 3, and then 4 through 6, and then 7 and 8, and then high school are all in like separate areas. And then you might have all your men go over here and your women go over here. It's just there's obviously like a really there's benefit to that age base or lifestyle based ministry, but there's also something special about just having everybody together. Like if the church is a
Yeah.
family and we're supposed to gather as a
Yeah.
family, I don't go to Thanksgiving and then completely separate from certain people based on age
Right.
or gender. Like we just hang out together,
Right.
right? That's just
Yeah.
how Thanksgiving works. That's how family gatherings work. Um,
Yeah.
and for some sympathy for your pastor, but then maybe like a challenge to folks who go through this as well. Like we always say at Eternity, and just in any teaching, preaching, equipping, like you need to be able to explain things to kids. And if you can't explain it to a kid, you probably don't really get it. Like if you just know how to repeat phrases that were written in a commentary about a passage, then you're not really understanding, that passage or the scripture or the theology behind it or whatever it might be. And it's a really hard and interesting exercise to try and talk to a group of people where you have 7-year-olds who might not even be followers of Jesus, probably not, they're 7, and then
Mhm.
you've got 57-year-olds that might have been following Jesus longer than you've been alive. So, you can have that mixed together, and to be able to try and create a family space where we're still learning together and worshiping together. It's a beautiful thing. I love it.
Mhm.
I think you should keep doing it, even if people complain, until they are about
Yeah.
to
Oh no.
finally,
Yeah. We committed to a year.
back
We
off.
committed
All
to
right,
doing
there
it
you
for the
go.
next year. So yeah.
That's awesome. All right, Matt. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being on Eternity Archives. I really appreciate it. And all right, everybody. Thank you so much. See you.
Thanks, man.